If you believe that kindness can transform an entire community, then today's story is just for you. A sudden storm, a man treated unfairly, and a redemption no one saw coming. Watch until the end to feel the true power of compassion and justice. Don't forget to like, share this video to spread this meaningful message, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss more inspiring, human-centered stories like this one. Willow Creek was a model neighborhood, where the lawns were always neatly trimmed. The mailboxes were painted uniformly white, and each morning began with the soft barking of dogs in the distance and the faint aroma of coffee drifting from porch to porch. But beneath that peaceful exterior was a suffocating system of rigid rules, and at the center of it all stood Karen, the president of the Homeowners Association, HOA, who saw every small violation as a threat to the integrity of the community. With her heels clicking against the stone walkway and a notebook always in hand, she was the embodiment of regulation, unyielding, uncompromising, and uninterested in exceptions. Lucas Hale wasn't the kind of man who made trouble. A self-employed builder, he left home at the crack of dawn in worn jeans, frayed gloves, and a weathered pickup truck that roared to life like a stubborn old horse. That truck wasn't just a vehicle, it was his livelihood. From it, he hauled cement, lumber, tools, and sometimes less tangible cargo, like hope and dignity. Lucas wasn't rich, but he had something more valuable: trust from his clients, respect from his neighbors, and a life that didn't bother anyone. That morning, Lucas had parked his truck by the curb in front of his house for less than 3 hours. He was working on a backyard fence project and needed to move tools from his garage to the yard. As always, he assumed it wouldn't be a problem, but Karen happened to drive by at just the wrong moment. Without a word, without leaving a note or warning, she called the tow company, and hours later, Lucas's truck was gone, hauled away like an abandoned object. No notice, no chance to explain. Just a fine pinned to his door handle, a cold reminder that he'd broken a rule. When Lucas came outside and saw the empty space where his truck had been, he stood there for a long moment, trying to convince himself it was a mistake. But his neighbors only shook their heads in resignation. "It was Karen," one said. "She doesn't like trucks parked on the street, even for a morning." Lucas hurried to the HOA office, a small room tucked inside the community center, always lit, always impersonal, just like the way it operated. Karen was jotting something down when she looked up at him, unsurprised. "You called the tow truck?" Lucas asked, trying to stay calm, though frustration burned in his eyes. Karen didn't look up a second time. "Yes, the regulations are clear, no exceptions. I parked for just a few hours, just to move tools into the yard. I live here. This is my home." "And precisely because you live here, you should know the rules," Karen replied. "There's no room for emotion in management. If I make an exception for you, I'd have to do it for everyone. We can't let this neighborhood turn into a construction zone." "It's not a construction zone. It's how I make a living," Lucas said quietly, then paused. "Now, I'll be without a truck for at least a week. I have unfinished contracts, clients waiting. I haven't harmed anyone." Karen finally looked up, but there was no sympathy in her gaze, only the detached firmness of someone too accustomed to making decisions without looking back. "That's not my concern, Mr. Hale. I'm simply enforcing the rules." Lucas turned and walked away, feeling as though one of the pillars holding up his small, carefully balanced world, built on responsibility, hard work, and quiet pride, had just been pulled out from under him. Along the tree-lined street he knew so well, his steps were heavier than ever. No one said anything. They only peeked out from behind curtains, as they always did, when someone fell under Karen's scrutiny. What no one knew was that just a few hours later, the very woman who had made the cold decision would be the one in desperate need of Lucas's help. Lucas's story is just beginning. A towed truck, a lost job, and a man treated unfairly. But what happens when nature steps in and turns everything upside down? If you're already feeling the injustice woven into every detail, then the next part will keep you on the edge of your seat. Hit that like button, share the video to spread the message of fairness, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss part 2 when the storm truly hits. That afternoon, the sky over Willow Creek took on a quiet, silvery gray. Heavy clouds gathered slowly from the west, carrying a damp weight and a growing sense of unease that anyone who had lived in the area would recognize. A big storm was coming. The morning forecast had only predicted light showers, but now the wind was howling through the treetops, and even the perfectly manicured lawns seemed to bow under the pressure of what was approaching. Lucas sat on his porch, the old wooden chair creaking in rhythm with the wind. He had no work that day. His truck was still impounded by the city, and he didn't have enough money to get it back just yet. No clients had called. There were no drills buzzing, no scent of sawdust, no clanging of metal. Just the distant roll of thunder, reminding him that nature didn't need permission to arrive and change everything. He pulled his cap down low, quietly watching the first drops of rain fall on the steps. Not fast, not loud, but steady and purposeful. The humid air made his sweater cling to his skin, but still, Lucas didn't move. In that moment, he felt small in a vast world, not just because he'd lost his truck, but because everything he had worked so hard to build could be taken away with a single phone call or a single storm. Across the neighborhood, Karen walked through her living room and pulled back the curtain to look outside. The sky had darkened at an unnatural pace. She had lived in Willow Creek for over 10 years and had seen her share of serious storms, but there was something about the churning clouds and the gusts of wind that made her uneasy. Karen wasn't the type to panic, but as she watched rainwater rush through the backyard drains, she had a strange realization. Something wasn't right with her house. The basement, HOA documents, storage boxes, electrical equipment. Everything was down there because she believed no one could organize better than she could, and everything had to be in its place. But now, water had started creeping down the basement stairs. A flash of lightning lit up the window and she jumped. Karen quickly called the other board members, but only got busy signals or voicemail. She called the waterproofing company she'd used before, but they were closed due to the weather. The water was rising by the minute. Years of careful organization and cherished belongings were slipping away in cold, creeping streams. In a rare moment she never imagined she'd face, Karen felt helpless, not because of the storm, but because she had no one to turn to. And then, in a strange act of instinct, she scrolled through her contacts and pressed on the name she had mentally crossed off that very morning, Lucas Hale. The phone rang several times. Karen gripped it tightly, waiting for a cold voice or maybe a firm rejection. But instead, she heard a calm and short response. "I'm listening." "Lucas, it's me, Karen. My house. It's flooding. I don't know what to do. Can you come help?" There was no apology in her voice, only the reluctant admission that she needed him. Karen, who once declared that rules could not be broken, was now breaking her own rule, reaching out to the very man she had cost his job. Lucas was silent for a moment, not because he wanted to make her feel worse, but because he was surprised by his own reaction. Then he stood up, pulled on his raincoat, grabbed his toolbox and flashlight. No complaints, no conditions. He left his porch and stepped into the rain as it pelted the pavement like sharp, angry nails. The wind howled, almost daring him to turn back. But Lucas only lowered his head and picked up his pace, toward the home of the woman who had taken everything from him and now needed him more than anyone else. Karen stood at the door, the beam from her flashlight trembling in her hand as it lit up patches of water spreading across the tile floor. Her flats were soaked, and the hair she carefully styled every morning was now clinging to her face, tousled by the wind. She no longer looked like the cold, composed HOA president everyone knew. When the door opened, she could hardly believe it. Lucas was standing there in a rain-soaked jacket, toolbox slung across his shoulder, his eyes serious, but not filled with the anger she had feared. "Thank you for coming," Karen said softly, but Lucas simply nodded and stepped inside, as if no thanks were necessary to begin helping. Without hesitation, he checked the drainage system, asking Karen to gather rags, buckets, and anything that could help keep the water from spreading deeper. He quickly discovered a blocked pipe at the back of the house, the main reason the basement was flooding. Saying little, he removed the clog, cleared the line, and used the small pump he had brought to begin drawing the water out. Karen stood nearby, silently watching. She had never seen anyone work so quietly, so efficiently, without complaint, without sarcasm, and without a single word about what she had done to him. As the water began to recede and the basement lights reflected once more on the clean tile floor, Karen realized her hands were clenched tight, her nails digging into her palms. Something inside her had started to break. Not panic, but something more unfamiliar. Shame. "Lucas," she called, her voice catching. I don't deserve your help. What I did to you this morning." "You don't need to say anything," Lucas interrupted, not harshly but firmly. "I came because you needed help. That's all." Karen bit her lip, then lowered her head. "But I need to say it. Not for you, for me. I've gotten so used to following rules that I forgot. Sometimes people matter more than policies. This morning I cost you your job, and now you're the one saving me from losing everything." Lucas remained silent. Her words couldn't undo what had happened, but maybe, just maybe, it was something she had never admitted to anyone before. A genuine confession. When he finished sealing the back door, patching the leaks, and positioning the pump in the basement corner, Karen handed him a towel. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said slowly, "but I hope I can find a way to make it right." Lucas wiped his hands, looking around the now quiet house. The rain outside still fell, but it no longer sounded like a threat. It had become the fading rhythm of a long night nearing its end. "Don't do that to anyone else," Lucas said. "Don't take away someone's job, their dignity, or their chance, just because you can. Some damage can't be fixed with an apology." Karen stood frozen in place. He wasn't angry. He wasn't self-righteous. He was simply stating the truth, a truth she had refused to face for far too long. Lucas left in silence. The door closed behind him, but it left an unspoken emptiness in Karen's chest. She looked around the house that once symbolized her control. Now it stood as a reminder of what she couldn't manage without help from someone she had cast aside. Karen sat down on the basement stairs, and for the first time in years, she felt like she wasn't in control anymore. Not as the HOA president, not as a figure of authority, but as a human being who had failed to show compassion. Outside, the rain began to ease. The last few drops tapped gently on the roof, and then disappeared into the night. 3 days after the storm, the sky over Willow Creek was unusually blue, so clear it was hard to believe a storm had ever swept through. The grass had been trimmed, the streets were clean, and the houses had returned to their peaceful appearance. But something had changed, not in the bricks or the gutters, but in the way the residents looked at one another. A quiet stillness hung over the neighborhood, not out of fear of Karen as before, but because everyone was waiting for something unprecedented, an emergency HOA meeting called by Karen herself. That afternoon, the community center was packed. The atmosphere wasn't tense, but it was heavy. Longtime residents, young couples, even children sitting beside their parents, all were present. But Lucas was there too, standing quietly at the back of the room, avoiding too many eyes. He didn't speak to anyone. He had only come to listen. Karen stepped up to the podium. She wasn't holding any rule books, didn't have a laptop or assistant beside her. She wore a simple blouse, her hair pulled back neatly, and her face more serene than anyone had ever seen. As she looked around the room, one could sense the thin, invisible line between a leader and the people, one she had never acknowledged until now. "I've served as president of this HOA for 8 years, Karen began, her voice steady but solemn. "I used to believe that maintaining order meant letting no mistake slip through, that if I was strict enough, people would respect the rules, and this neighborhood would remain perfect." No one reacted. Karen took a breath. "But the perfection I pursued made me forget something more important. People. I placed regulations above kindness. I treated one of our residents, Lucas Hale, not as a neighbor, but as a nuisance." All eyes began to turn toward Lucas. He remained still, arms folded, his expression unreadable, just listening. 3 days ago, Karen continued, the very person I had pushed into hardship came to help me, when no one else did. He didn't ask why. He didn't demand an apology. He simply helped, because it was the right thing to do. A quiet cough echoed from somewhere in the room, followed by complete silence. "I'm not standing here today to say I've changed. I'm standing here to admit I was wrong. I no longer deserve to represent this community if I can't place humanity above policy. Karen paused, pulled a small slip of paper from her pocket, and spoke clearly. Therefore, I resign from my position as HOA president, effective immediately. A ripple of whispers spread through the room. No one had expected this, especially not from the woman who had once treated the HOA like an unshakable fortress. This community needs a leader who doesn't just write reports, but listens, someone who knows how to balance structure with empathy. I'm not that person anymore. Karen stepped down from the podium. She didn't expect applause, and indeed, there was none. But as people moved aside to let her pass, their eyes no longer carried fear, but reflection. And in that, she realized, for the first time, they were seeing her as a person. Lucas turned to leave, but a voice called out from the front, "Mr. Hale, please wait a moment." An elderly woman stood, Mrs. Elliott, who lived on the east corner, and said, "I want to thank you, not just for helping Karen, but for reminding us that a community isn't built from bricks and pavement. It's built from kindness." Another person nodded, then another. Lucas offered a slight nod in return. He said nothing, but his eyes softened. He left the meeting in a calmness he hadn't felt in days. Karen remained, watching his silhouette disappear beyond the door. She knew she couldn't undo every consequence, but perhaps for the first time, she had done the right thing without needing power to justify it. And somewhere, between the quiet trees of Willow Creek, trust was beginning to grow again, not from rules, but from the people who chose to see one another as human. In modern life, we often get swept up in the whirlwind of rules, authority, and responsibility. So much so that we forget the simplest thing of all, our shared humanity. The story of Karen, a woman who leads a homeowners association, HOA, and Lucas, a humble construction worker, is more than just a sequence of events in a quiet neighborhood. It's a mirror reflecting the choices we all face in our everyday lives. The first and clearest message from this story is this: rules cannot replace compassion. Laws and regulations are necessary to maintain order, but when rules become an excuse to suppress empathy, they do more harm than good. Karen followed the rules when she had Lucas's truck towed, but morally, she was in the wrong. That truth only became clear when she found herself in need of the very help she had denied someone else. It reminds us, doing what's right isn't always the same as doing what's best. Secondly, the story highlights the quiet strength of ordinary kindness. Lucas didn't seek revenge. He didn't shame or expose the HOA president. He simply helped because that's who he was. In a world that often glorifies confrontation and retaliation, quiet actions like Lucas's carry a power that is longer lasting. His example reminds us that kindness doesn't need justification or reward, and that's what makes it powerful. Another important takeaway is about change and redemption. Karen wasn't a villain. She was a reflection of many of us, too focused on keeping everything in order to notice the people living within that order. But she changed. She admitted her mistake, and she stepped down so that someone else could lead better. That's a lesson in courage, owning failure and giving up control in order to do the right thing. We also see the value of belated recognition. Lucas didn't need to be celebrated, but when the community stood and thanked him, they did something that is still missing in many places. They acknowledged goodness. In life, sometimes a simple thank you, a moment of recognition, even if it comes late, can heal old wounds. It rebuilds trust, not with slogans, but with sincere action. Finally, this story reminds us that a true community isn't built through surveillance and control, but through support and understanding. No one is perfect in their role, but we can create an environment where people are guided by kindness instead of punished by indifference. Applied to real life, each of us, whether we're leaders, co-workers, neighbors, or strangers, has a choice to treat others with strict rules or with empathy. The next time you're in a situation where you think they're clearly in the wrong, ask yourself, am I right, but at the cost of someone else's dignity? Don't wait for a storm to realize what's been lost, because kindness, when offered at the right moment, might just be the only shelter that stands firm when everything else falls apart. The story may have come to an end, but its echoes will surely linger in all of us. A simple act of kindness, a long overdue apology, and a community beginning to understand one another. Everything started with a storm and ended with a change in the human heart. If you believe the world still needs stories like this, about compassion, justice, and the power of forgiveness, give this video a like to support that spirit. Share it to spread this meaningful message to those around you. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel because we'll continue bringing you real, heartfelt stories that remind us all. Goodness still exists if you're willing to see it.